You can rise to that position on your own, and when you genuinely come across as a leader, you're more likely to be identified and treated as a leader. Leadership is a lifelong pursuit. Global leaders are always growing, and what got you here 5 years ago may actually be holding you back now. So this is a great chance for us to start and get into this, dig into this topic some more. All of us have that spark of leadership in us, whether we're in business, whether we're in government, we're volunteers, maybe as parents. The challenge is to understand ourselves well enough to discover where we can use our leadership gifts to serve others. And we can start to do this by building self-awareness and leading authentically. So great. This program today, I just want to let you know that it's full, chock full of great ideas, tips, tools, and you won't want to miss a thing, so you might want to turn off your email, etc., and get ready to tune in, fasten your safety belts. This is all about you. So let's go. I introduced myself a little bit earlier, but just to say again, I'm Sue Shinomiya, the person on the right, obviously. And the other things that I do, I work mainly with Fortune 500 companies that are struggling, as maybe some of you who are out there are, to close gaps across distances, across cultures, and across differences. And I also work with leaders who want to expand their cultural competency and their global mindset. The industries that I work with range from high-tech to pharmaceuticals to finance to retail, and I've spent at least a decade overseas, mainly in Japan, which I consider to be my second home. Now I'd like to turn it over to Sean, who is going to introduce himself, who is my co-host for this webinar today. Sean?
Thank you, Sue. Thanks so much. Yeah, so I'm Sean DeBerk. I'm Director of Learning at RW3 Culture Wizard. I'm based in New York City. I lead a global network of facilitators with whom we partner with to design and deliver intercultural learning experiences to clients from all sorts of industries around the world. As far as global experience goes, I've lived and worked in 4 different countries. I've traveled to over 45, and I grew up in a very intercultural world. I like to tell people this because it really has informed my own leadership style. I was part of a very strongly immigrant family growing up in Southern California. In any case, I'm delighted to be co-facilitating with Sue today, and hope you find the webinar time well spent. I'd like to say a few words about RW3 Culture Wizard, which was founded back in 2001 by Charlene Solomon and Michael Schell, who have been providing intercultural learning to organizations for 35 years. Culture Wizard is our flagship online learning platform that offers a range of innovative resources to develop business people's ability to work, manage, and lead effectively across cultures around the world. We're known in the market for our blended approach, which combines online and mobile learning with customized instructor-led experiences that we serve to, today, over 100 global organizations. The interesting thing is that all of our monthly cultural wisdom webinars, including this one, are basically abridged versions, short versions of the instructor-led learning that we provide clients. So just to give you an idea, this webinar would actually form part of a half-day workshop or even a full-day workshop that gives participants more time to develop awareness and strategies to lead effectively in a global environment. In any case, let's move on quickly with some housekeeping items. We've prepared a worksheet for you to write in as part of the self-reflection our topic requires. So please have that in front of you for the duration of the webinar. If you haven't yet downloaded it, please do so now. I'm plugging in a link into the chat area of the GoToWebinar dashboard. You can click that. It's a Dropbox link. I hope it works in your computer environment. I've heard that some people have issues with this, but don't worry if you aren't able to download it. Simply have a piece of paper nearby or even a Word document open so that you can type out the notes that we're going to ask you to take in a bit. I'd also like to briefly familiarize you all with the GoToWebinar platform that we're using today. We have a large number of callers, so your phones are on mute to reduce background noise. We do not, or rather we do want to encourage participation. So please go ahead and use that questions box whenever you'd like to ask questions. You'll see that in the GoToWebinar panel. It's probably somewhere on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll be saving those and asking or answering those at the very end where we've left 5 minutes for questions and answers. And of course, as always, we will make a recording of this webinar available to all Culture Wizard clients. In about 1 week from today, we'll be sending you all an email with instructions on how to log into Culture Wizard and view the recording. One last note, there is also credit available for this webinar for anyone working on their Certified Relocation Professional designation from ERC, the Employee Relocation Council. This is a quick reminder that our webinar today is the second phase in a 4-part series on global leadership. We had the introduction to our model back in January. The third step in this series will be on developing a global mindset, and that will take place in July. We're going to conclude the series this year with trust and collaboration in November. The agenda for today, we're going to be moving very quickly through these topics. We're going to start with a revisit to why global leadership and authenticity are so important. We're going to look at self-awareness as a common denominator for great global leadership. We're going to look at the brain in some detail later on with a quote, or rather a segment we're going to listen to from a really high-level leadership coach that has a lot to tell us about how the brain works. And then we're also going to look at how you can start to chart your global leadership life map as a way to get closer to your life story. And of course, at the end, we'll have a few moments for questions and answers. All right, so why is global leadership important? This might be a little obvious to some of you, but for the rest of us, let's center ourselves on a few, I might say, alarming statistics that make an argument for why leadership at a global level is more important than ever. Research from McKinsey last year indicates that 30% of American companies fail to exploit global business opportunities because of a lack of leadership capability. That same study showed that American companies spend $14 billion annually on leadership development. So despite having a sizable budget to develop leaders, there's still a significant lack of training to address the leadership on a global level. There are a lot of statistics like these that show significant lack of satisfaction across the board with global leadership development programs. There was a really insightful stat that we showed back in January for our introduction to this topic. I wanted to reemphasize it. It said that high-performing organizations are 4 times as likely to be highly effective at developing leaders with global skills. So the positive correlation between market performance and global leadership development was really apparent in that study. So as you know, we have developed a model to support sustainable development of global leaders. And we wanted to briefly review that before we move forward. You'll notice that the red global leader gear right there is positioned just behind the forehead of this person's head, which we did on purpose because this is where the cortex is located in the brain. This is the part of the brain that enables the global leader to be effective. It's a part of the brain that allows us to process complex information that we face in the global business environment. There's a lot of information that neuroscience can teach us about the brain and how we can be more effective. And we're going to touch on that in depth a little bit later. We also want to point out that raising self-awareness is a process, and the goal or the outcome is to learn how to lead with authenticity, which is more tangible. So the methods that we suggest today are not to force people to get emotional or to get touchy-feely. This isn't a therapy session. Our goal is to simply help you acknowledge that your background and your culture, your life experiences, your relationships with other people are the ingredients that make you who you are today. And this has a profound effect on the way that you lead. So you can't lead without authenticity, and you can't be authentic without self-awareness. So we're going to see how quiet introspection can help you get there. The other components of the model here are the global mindset, and then building trust and enabling collaboration, which we're going to review in the 3rd and 4th phases of our webinar series. So with that, I'd like to give the floor to my colleague Sue to get us going.
Okay. Thank you very much for putting that all together for us, Sean. That's great. So now we're going to transition over from the global leadership to why is authenticity so critical to global leadership. I'd like to start by just making sure we're clear on the definition of authenticity for today's purposes. I could keep it very simple and talk about Socrates saying, know thyself. Shakespeare also put it well, to thine own self be true. But those are kind of the basic, background for it. Today's concept, when we talk about authenticity in leadership, it takes that self-knowledge to a higher level. Indeed, authentic leaders truly do know who they are. And they also demonstrate a passion for their purpose, practice their values consistently, lead with their hearts as well as their heads. They establish long-term meaningful relationships, and they have the self-discipline to get results. I hope you got all that down. Let me reiterate it or break it down into 4 key points, and these are coming from the book by Bill George on authentic leadership. So the first point is authentic leaders are self-aware and genuine, and their actions reflect their values. Secondly, they lead with their heart and not just their minds. Thirdly, they focus on the long term, especially in relationships. And fourthly, they are mission-driven and focused on results. So authentic leadership happens when our actions reflect our values. The people who work with us, our followers, will sense this, and it will make it so much easier for followers to trust their leaders. When people have genuine trust in their leaders, of course, there's a business component to this. They are far more likely to engage at their highest level and create prosperity for their organizations and for themselves. So if we as leaders can learn to broadcast authentically and build this trust, it will be paramount to being successful. When we add this component of global leadership, the global leader, I don't think I need to even tell this group because we have 40 countries in this room today. Trust itself may be established and extended in very different ways from culture to culture and from person to person. In some cultures, trust is a given until you mess up or make a mistake. In other cultures, trust must be earned. It must be earned over time and also through your status. So there are differences there. Also, when it comes to the definition of authenticity or being genuine, many cultures around the world, for example, Japan and many East Asian countries, authenticity and sincerity include saving face or not causing embarrassment for the other. So just as a taste of that, at a fundamental level, we start with an understanding of who we are and how we come across, and from that place of authenticity, we'll need to be flexible enough to adapt to a multitude of environments in order to be effective. So why authenticity? Just to reiterate, the research, and we will talk about the research about authenticity in a moment, it's a critical behavior for effective global leaders. It's transparent. It enables that trust to develop. It helps with effective collaboration, and authentic leaders empower others to lead authentically themselves. It's a really great virtuous cycle. And it also encourages followers to contribute their best work. And we'll talk a little bit more about all the different ways to encourage followers to contribute their best work and their best thinking. So global leaders, the global leadership skills that we're talking about today and in this whole series are very critical, and leaders must learn to maximize intellectual contribution, facilitate global collaboration, and encourage that engagement. So if you want to unlock the brain power in your organization so everyone can contribute, it's a huge pressure to manage these differences across borders. So the business challenge is quite unique today. The older models don't really work in a more global situation. We still have to collaborate. We still have to build trust. We still have to have that shared vision, but it has to translate across different cultures. And cultural differences, especially in the way people lead and expect to be led, make the job all the more complex. So simple expectations of how a leader should present ideas or communicate ideas or delegate tasks, these can vary from country to country, which is why the global mindset is an important piece of our model today. We'll get back to that a little bit later and in our next webinar. But in the meantime, you may be wondering, are there universal leadership principles? Today we're going to talk about a few universal principles for authenticity and self-awareness. But one thing I did find that is a kind of universal principle, if you will, when I was working with people in the UK and also delivering workshops on leadership in Japan, is that one thing that is universal is bad leadership. So, horrible bosses. We've all had a horrible boss or two, I'm sure. Maybe it was a teacher. Maybe it was a team captain. These movies, or the clips that you see in front of you, are from different movies that are kind of US-centric, so for our audiences overseas, you may or may not be familiar with them. I'll give you a disclaimer. Viewer discretion is advised. They are all great examples of the worst kind of boss you'd ever want to have. Here is what not to do. So, we don't have the corner on the bad boss market in the U.S., but we do have some background on this for sure. So what I'd like everyone here to do is to think a moment about a terrible boss that you have had and use the question area to describe a horrible boss or a leader you've worked with. And in order to kind of jog our thinking, I think that, Sean, you and I were talking earlier about a terrible boss that you had, and I thought that was a really good example. Would you mind telling the group about that today?
I would be, yes, I would be happy to share that, just so that we can avoid this in the future. But anyway, I had a job when I was a grad student working for an IT company, and there was one manager that oversaw a majority of our work with some offshore partners in India. And this manager was extremely militant, and he would yell and scream and shout orders at everyone, and had no problem giving harsh criticism to individuals during meetings in front of other people. So while everyone was put off by this style, the folks in India were completely crippled by the loss of face this manager would cause. So this was the unfortunately typical type of horrible boss that you probably see in these movies, but I hope that example is helpful in helping others to write down some comments here. And I do see some coming in already, so I'd actually like to go ahead and read out what folks are contributing. One person here says, removing privileges once enjoyed without being forewarned. Wonderful.
Oh, no, that's terrible.
Another one here, micromanager. Micromanages constantly, doesn't share institutional knowledge. Micromanager comes up several times too. Pretty interesting here. Another one here, a lack of profoundness, lack of prejudice, or rather prejudice, ignorant, although the person had a PhD. Interesting. Another one here is competitive. Bully. Tried to stop me going on vacation if I didn't complete a deliverable. Wow. Wow. Undercutting direct reports due to insecurity, a fear that I would replace him one day. Wow.
Oh, that's great.
Wow. Really good.
Well, no, that's not great. This
Manager.
is exactly what you don't want to be or become, yeah.
Exactly. Oh, this one, Sue, is great. So Dr. Jekyll and Hyde personality. Nice one day, bully the next day.
Oh, interesting, interesting. These are great. And thank you very much, everybody, for contributing to this. I think we've hit a button here. You know, I think everybody has this experience or has had some kind of experience with this. So I'm going to, let's keep capturing those examples, but I'm going to move this into this next important question about these terrible bosses. Can we consider them authentic? Oh, no. Well, we could argue that they are being true to themselves somehow, but without a doubt, there's no self-awareness going on, and they really don't care. Also, the relationship piece. Well, let me be crystal clear. Authenticity does not mean you should be an authentic jerk or a fool or a bully. Absolutely not. We have all had experiences with this kind of boss, and we don't want to work for them, and we certainly don't aspire to become them. So what I'd like to move into now is for us to think, kind of twisting it, or moving it around to the other side. Why is becoming a more effective global leader important to you and important to you today? So if you have that worksheet in front of you, this is a great time to take that out, and if you have the printout, and take a few moments to write down why becoming a more effective global leader is important to you. Or you can jot down your notes anywhere on any piece of paper that you have. And if you feel, if you finish writing something down, feel free to put it in that conversation, in that chat box that we have already started to use. And I'll give you a moment to reflect. And perhaps, Sean, do you think it's okay if I go ahead and give an example of my own? So
That would be great.
Start people thinking, yeah, that for me, becoming a more effective global leader is so important, obviously, as I aspire to be a thought leader in intercultural competency and global leadership development, but it's also important for my clients and for my graduate students, for my organizational clients. In addition, I serve on the board of a society of intercultural professionals. So on a daily basis, I'm working with people around the world and having to create new mindsets and create more mindful thinking and transform performance and also to get things done. Are we getting any examples? Maybe some people are willing to write their ideas up on the screen. Great.
Yeah, so let me share a few of these. That was a really great one. There's one here, very plain and simple. Global business demands it. I like that. Very simple. We've got another one here. I need to build rapport with teammates around the world to get work done. Different relationship building styles there. Great one here. Being a more effective global leader will help me to work better with my clients that are internationally dispersed. It'll increase our productivity and our ability to collaborate. This is a nice one here. To contribute to positive change in the world. A very straightforward answer, again, being a global leader can help deliver the business results that we need in the global environment that we're working in.
That's great.
Really interesting one from another individual here. Self-preservation within a global company. Kind of similar to what we heard earlier. Global business simply demands this skill set.
That's right.
One more here I'd like to share. Global leadership envisions and motivates people in every context of my life. That's a very nice personal one there. And a lot of them here, to help me grow as a person and a guide for future partners and employees, the idea of modeling behaviors as a global leader and that being contagious in a way to folks that are around you.
Well, I like that, contagious.
One more, and then I'll let you we'll continue here. So local is global. Everyone needs it. It's so true. It's such an important skill, and recognizing this impact of globalization, if we're to call it that, this increasing, always increasing, or more deeply interconnected nature of our world is really demanding this. Thanks everyone for sharing that. So I guess I'm going to go ahead and carry us forward to the next bit here. Now that we've reflected on why becoming a more effective global leader is important to you, hope you guys had a chance to write some of this down in your worksheet so you can remember this. Let's start moving towards that goal. There is an overwhelming amount of research on leadership, but the one study that really stands out was led by Bill George, who interviewed 125 leaders from the ages of 23 to 93. And he was very careful. He chose 15 people at least from each of those decades between 23 and 93 and found that from, and I quote, from analyzing 3,000 pages of transcripts, our team was startled to see you do not have to be born with specific characteristics or traits of a leader. Leadership emerges from your life story. The implication for leaders is that you need to know your life story and how it shows up in your leadership style. It's really powerful stuff. We really want to emphasize that self-awareness was the only common denominator in this study that allowed for great leadership, because it opened leaders up to being authentic and to seeing what made them distinct from the people they were leading. Now, some people incorrectly interpret this concept of authentic leadership as being consistent in all situations, using the same style or approach no matter who the audience is or where they are in the world. This approach might remind you of one of those horrible bosses that we described earlier. The authentic leader that we're talking about right now is fully aware of her or his style, the impact that it has on followers, and feels very comfortable adapting accordingly. Being authentic doesn't mean you never adjust to your environment. It includes, as Sue mentioned earlier, being sensitive to others, and in many cases meeting them halfway or compromising, integrating differences in order to be effective. This is especially true when leading across cultures, and it's also just as important in what might seem to be a single culture environment, but diversity is really everywhere when you open your eyes to it. Now, let's turn our attention to a technique that we can use to tap into our self-awareness and lead with authenticity. We're going to listen to Peter Bregman, who is a leadership coach, and he has some really interesting research to share about how the brain impacts the way we lead.
I'm Peter Bregman. I'm CEO of Bregman Partners. And the focus of all of our work is how do we help leaders move forward in their lives and help their organizations move forward. And it's very much about the willingness to take difficult actions, and that's what we help them do. As leaders, we are most effective and most impactful when we focus on the outcome that we're trying to achieve. When we don't act out of the past, and we don't act out of our patterns, and we don't act out of the history and the ways that we've always acted. But instead, we make a decision about where I'm headed, what is the outcome I want to achieve, and then we make choices about how to act to achieve those particular outcomes. When I'm angry, in that moment, for example, here's what's happening. You have a stimulus to your amygdala. The amygdala is the back of your brain. It's the reptilian part of your brain. It's incredibly useful if you're about to be attacked by a saber-toothed tiger, because it allows you to fight or flight or freeze, right? That's the part of the brain that we know how to respond out of, that we respond out of gut reactions, gut knee-jerk reactions. The problem is we're not often in front of saber-toothed tigers, even though we look at our boss who might be yelling at us, or we look at an employee who's made us angry, or we look at a situation that may make us feel vulnerable or afraid, and we immediately see in our amygdala a saber-toothed tiger, and we react out of that place. And you're flooded with these emotions. It's the limbic part of your brain. It's the oldest part of your brain. It's incredibly useful at times. But 99% of the time, that's not where you want to act from. You want to act from the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the front of your brain. It's the part of your brain that thinks. It's the part of your brain that's rational, that's logical. And we need to give ourselves just enough time to let the stimulus go from the prefrontal cortex, from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, so that the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of our brain, can gain cognitive control over the amygdala that would like to fight, flight, or freeze. And the way we end up doing that is with the incredible power of a single breath, right? So if you take one deep breath, you slow down your whole system. And what you need is, when I spoke to a friend of mine, a neuroscientist at Columbia University, Dr. Joshua Gordon, I was asking him, how long does it take for the prefrontal cortex to get cognitive control of the amygdala, for the thinking part of my brain to get control over the reptilian part of my brain? And he said 1.5 seconds, like 1 to 2 seconds. And I thought, well, great, so 4 seconds. So I'm going to be generous. I'm going to give people 4 seconds. So take a deep breath and breathe for 4 seconds, slow down the action, and have a moment of awareness, and that's the self-awareness. Have a moment of self-awareness to say, what's going on here? And then ask yourself, what is it that I want to achieve? What is the outcome that I want? And then make a smart choice based on what you want to achieve, not based on what stimulated you to act in the first place. Right? It's counterintuitive, because I would not act if not for the stimulus. I wouldn't have to respond if the employee wasn't failing. I wouldn't have to respond in some way. I wouldn't be feeling the anger. But I choose how to respond based on a future I want to create, not based on the past that stimulated my action in the first place. So we can't let our amygdalas run the show. We can't let sort of our emotional, knee-jerk gut reactions run the show. We have to slow down enough, gain control of it, of the situation, think about the outcome that we want to achieve, and then take the action that's going to lead us to that outcome. And that's powerful leadership, and that kind of leadership can't happen without deep self-awareness of what's going on that's leading you to want to act in the first place.
All right. Thank you, Peter. Hope that was clear enough for everyone to hear. On this next slide, we wanted to show you an image that roughly points out the various parts of the brain that are relevant to our topic today. What Peter described about pausing, letting any emotional reaction pass, and taking those 4 seconds to breathe and react based on our desired outcome is a powerful technique that we can all use to respond to difficult global leadership situations, and really situations in general. I wanted to give you a bit more context around how our brains work. I find a lot of this insight just fascinating. Peter mentioned this in brief, but our brains evolved to rely on past experiences that told us what was good and bad for our survival. And most of those experiences forged strong neural pathways in our brains. This happened at a very young age. These pathways developed for a good reason, because they make it easier for us to react without having to think too hard each time we face a situation our brain thinks we've already been through. So in this way, our earliest life experiences and interactions with other people became the core of what we might call our social autopilot. This is a term that Loretta Graziano-Breuning coined in her work on neurochemistry. Learning about the way our brains inform workplace behavior is a powerful way to reframe the way that we lead.
Okay, so You know, it's interesting to me, and of course, this phrase here that leaders who invest in the practice of self-reflection and take that pause will outperform non-reflective leaders every time. When I started out in leadership coaching, we were so excited about the 1-minute manager. Now we've gotten it down to 4 seconds, so this is great news. So to paraphrase and bring together what Peter Bregman is saying, what Sean has mentioned here, this approach of taking those few seconds before taking action, it allows us to make choices about how to act based on the future we want to create, and not based on the past that stimulated our gut reaction in the first place. So leaders who invest in this will definitely be higher performers. And taking that one moment of self-reflection could be the key for stopping myself from continuing bad leadership habits. And also it will give me a moment to be kind of considering or contemplating, is there a cultural component that I need to watch out for here? And allow other people to kind of react and respond to me in a way that kind of shows mutual respect, and also allows others to do their own thinking. And we're going to get to that part in a little bit. But a leader can tangibly improve not only their own performance by doing this, but can also help their followers shift their thinking towards a more self-inspired problem solving. So very good. In summary, in this section here, your brain and your life story are, of course, intricately linked, so leaders cannot assume that anybody else's mental map is wired in the same way. So let's not waste any more time and effort telling people what to think. And if you think about it, since each of us does have a very unique set of neural paths, it literally means that no two of us think alike. So your life, your brain and your life story, they have an impact on how you lead, how you react in a crisis, how you manage employees, give feedback, develop people, receptivity to feedback, how you build relationships. And really, honestly, the only mental map that I can more fully hope to understand is my own. So I need to know where my own neural paths or my past came from so that I can continue to develop my self-awareness and continue to develop my authenticity. So next we're going to move into, again, a simple way of building our self-awareness and reflecting on our life story. This is what we call the self-awareness cycle. You might want to take some notes if this is interesting for you. It starts with identifying our life story. One life story, maybe it's several things that happened, a crisis, or it could be something simple that just left a really strong impression on you. And you reflect on it for a moment. In other words, I kind of connect the dots between the event or the thing that happened in your life and your values. Identify values, where they come from. And once you have done that, you continue this cycle to reflect upon the values and examine your behaviors. Reflect on values, examine the behaviors that come out of those values, come out of that value set. And in doing so, it raises your self-awareness. It lets me see who I am as a person and kind of bring that all together. Taking this to the next step, it allows us to take action based on our values. In other words, to lead with authenticity. So this is what we would call a virtuous cycle of self-awareness. You can lead and act authentically from your values and get comfortable with who you are and start feeling inspired to identify more life stories and more aspects of which, this is where your values spring from, and continue the cycle. So we're going to take this kind of example, and I hope you've got that example of some life story of your own. We'll be discussing that in a moment. But Sean has another tool that's really exciting that we're very excited to introduce to you today that also helps us identify our life stories.
That's right,
Sean?
Sue. So we are currently finalizing a brand new tool called the Global Leadership Life Map. You can see an image of that right here. We're going to be putting this on Culture Wizard, and I really want to encourage all of you to go and complete a life map of your own using this tool when it's launched in the coming week. It is a visually robust way to plot your life along this path. You can define those important life events and experiences by actually clicking on any of those circles that you see on that path. And when you click on it, you can actually define or select an icon first that kind of represents the experience that you want to kind of highlight. And then you can type in a bunch of notes, as little or as much as you'd like, about that experience. And in this one, I chose to write about when I moved to New York City after graduate school and I started my first job. I would go on to write more about this and how it has impacted my worldview, the way that I think, the way that I now am a professional here at RW3. I would go as far as I'd like to make those connections. But If you've only got a few minutes, I would just suggest plotting your map out, choosing the icons that connect to those specific events, those people who have influenced you, the books that you've read, the moves that you've made, the promotions that you've gotten, the challenges and traumatic emotional experiences that you've gone through as well. Of course, this is just for you, so it's really important that you make this as personal as you'd like it. But again, what we know is that our earliest experiences in life frame the way that we see the world, especially formative emotional experiences wired our brains in strong ways. So the goal is to chart these milestones in this leadership map so you can start to recognize how they show up in your behavior and in your leadership style. So then, what we've got here is actually a return to our worksheet. Sue, would you like to take us through this?
Sure, yes. I was saying that I was looking forward I wanted to say that I'm looking forward to being able to write out my life story using that tool. Maybe it can lead to an autobiography of some kind in the future. But for the moment, as Sean said, let's return to our worksheets. And any examples that were triggered for you in that self-reflection exercise, that self-awareness cycle that came to mind about your own life story, take a few moments and write down a few, maybe just one or two life experiences that had a significant influence on you. It could be from your childhood, it might be from your career at the workplace, maybe from a travel experience you had, family, friends, coaches. Books and movies can sometimes have an impact on us. So take that moment and write it down. We'll give you a couple of seconds of quiet time. I'm going to reiterate or talk about one example that came to my mind in doing this that had a lot to do with how I came to be a different kind of leader. I was tasked with becoming the manager for an on-site project in Japan, and the person who I was supposed to be working with, my first subordinate, told me just as soon as I got into the job that she was going to quit in 2 weeks, and I was completely floored. And I just hemmed and hawed, and I didn't know what to do exactly, but by the end of the week, or close to the end of the 2 weeks, I told her, you know, the reason this is really tough for me to come into this management role is because you've been such a valuable employee, and I don't want to lose you. And she said to me point blank, Sue, if you had told me that little piece of information 2 weeks ago, we might not have had to have this conversation. So what I learned is if you value somebody in life and in work and in any situation, you need to tell them that, and early on if possible. So that's just one example of something that had a significant influence on me in my early career as a manager. Sean, are we getting, and also we'll invite you, if you'd like to add some of your comments to the chat box, the question box, and we can share those with everybody if you want to.
While we're doing that, I'll share an example of my own, just so I know that it helps. I was a student when I relocated internationally the first time. I moved to Spain, to Madrid from California. I spent a full year there without returning home once, and I went through the full adjustment cycle. I was forced way outside of my comfort zone to speak a foreign language and relearn what it meant to be a well-adjusted, functioning member of society by slowly learning through trial and error what worked and what didn't in the Spanish environment. I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to live with a Spanish family who actually mentored me before I moved away into an apartment with other students from Spain. So the whole experience was really this ultimate test in flexibility that proved so valuable later in life when I had to relocate again to 2 other foreign countries, and even now in my profession as an interculturalist. I have an example here that I want to share, Sue, from one individual that wrote it. I grew up in an urban neighborhood where many of my peers were not able to achieve. Want to help those who work with me to do and be their best and do well. So the idea that growing up in an environment where you didn't see people being able to achieve, wanting to do that later in life through your profession, is a really strong connection between this idea of a life experience that happened earlier on in life, or at some point earlier on, and then now it's translated in some way into later parts of your life.
That's great.
Another one
That's
here.
a great example. Yeah, go ahead.
So this person moved around a lot as an adolescent. So he had to be flexible and make new friends often. This also led to developing relationships with great business mentors in his mid-20s. So the idea of having to forge those new relationships constantly, I guess, honed the skill to build those relationships in a range of environments. It's also a really great connection there.
That is wonderful.
One more, I think, that would be really good to share here, Sue. Being an exchange student in high school prepared this person to start thinking about how people live differently in other countries. So that simple exposure to difference opened this woman's eyes to that concept.
That's great. These are such good examples. This is perfect because this really leads us into our next exercise on our worksheet. If I may move to that. And this is making that connection to how your life experiences show up in your leadership or your style or your way of interacting with people today, but particularly in leadership. And I'm going to bring up a few leadership traits that we can all point to, and if any of these are the right ones for you, they match your feeling about how your life story and the traits that you value, definitely use these. Or if you have other ones that you want to add, you have a couple of boxes on your worksheet that you can just put those right into, or just write them down somewhere. But these are just some that, and thinking about these stories that Sean and I have talked about, certainly for me, visionary is very important, an important trait, and in communicating that vision, being inspiring and being collaborative. I would have to say those are some really key ones for me. Any that you wanted to add here, or do you? I don't know if people are writing it into the question box.
Yeah, Sue. Actually, I've got one here. Listening, inquisitive, flexible.
Oh, those are great. Let's add those to our list.
Tell me about it. Open, adaptable, collaborative, wise. Got empathetic, curious, inclusive, great.
Very good. I'm hoping, I would like for everybody in this group to be, on my team. Okay. This is probably a good place for us to transition into one of our really key concepts here about thinking and how we guide people's thinking. So I'm going to move to that. Keeping those traits in mind, I want to talk about this notion of leadership of thought. And I'm not talking about thought leadership, which is, professionals who are opinion leaders, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not talking about brainwashing anybody, certainly. What I'm talking about is leadership of thought or leadership of thinking. How do we, as leaders, inspire our followers to think for themselves and have their own insights? This is just fundamental to good leadership and requires self-awareness. It requires authenticity. Let me explain a little bit how this works. World-famous performance guru David Rock said that he encourages leaders to think about thinking. In other words, to be aware of my own thinking patterns, those neural paths, and my tendency to project my thinking onto my followers instead of letting them think for themselves. Rock believes that most leaders are wasting a lot of time and energy doing the thinking for other people. In other words, that they're trying to fix things, or they're trying to give advice, or these old habits of leadership that actually get in the way of people who are working and smart and really wanting to contribute, and they might have the right answer through their own thinking. So if we have, we're talking about global talent development now and human capital development, so it is the manager's role not to fix things and give advice. It's actually the role to maximize intellectual contribution. Thinking is what employees are actually being paid to do now. So Sean and I are going to give you a quick example of how this might work. We'll start with the old style of giving advice and telling people what to do, and then move over to this thinking style that we believe to be more effective. So Sean is I'm Sean's manager. I'm Sean's boss, and Sean has a business dilemma. Sean, what's on your mind?
Hey, Sue. So yeah, I'm trying hard to complete this research project by, well, your deadline tomorrow, but it's starting to feel overwhelming.
Sean, you just need to get more focused. Put some more elbow into that. Come on. When I was your age, I was the blah, blah, blah. Let me give you some advice. I'm going to fix it for you. So at this point, Sean is probably not very motivated. Are you, Sean?
Not at all.
Oh, no. Okay. Let's try that again with leadership of thought in mind. Okay. So here we go again. So, Sean, what's going on?
Hey, Sue. Yeah, I'm trying to really complete this research report by tomorrow, but it's really not coming together the way that I thought it would.
By tomorrow, okay. How can I best help you think this through, Sean?
That is a great question. So it would help maybe if you could help, or rather deeply clarify what your priorities are. I'm a little confused on those.
Great. Okay, let's do that. All right, so this is great. Now Sean and Sue are getting somewhere. Sean is actually thinking for himself, starting to work out his own solution, and it's a conversation. Plus, that question that I asked, how can I best help you think this through? That means that I, as the leader, I actually have to listen to Sean, and I so appreciate that person who put listening as that key trait for being a good leader. I have to listen authentically and hear what Sean has to say, hear his thinking, and start helping him to reach his own solutions. You see how that works? There are some other good phrases. How can I best help you with your thinking? How much has this been on your mind? Kind of directing the conversation towards thinking and the mind, as opposed to, here's what I would do if I were you. So I hope you get that distinction, because I think that's a very helpful piece in this. Because the effective leaders today, the ones who are going to really work, be successful, are the ones who are becoming masters of helping others think for themselves. So here we go. Here are the light bulbs coming on. Pivotal to all of this is the art of enabling other people to have their own insights. All right, so this is a really good place for us to move into our worksheet again and take a look at kind of bringing these different points together. That as a way to enhance your global leadership effectiveness, what would you do differently to build self-awareness, to further your own self-awareness? How can you use self-awareness and leadership of thinking or leadership of thought to lead authentically? And let me kind of reiterate some of the points that we made so far. We've talked about global leadership and authentic leadership. We've talked about the terrible bosses and why we want to become effective global leaders. We've looked at the research and self-awareness, taking that moment of self-awareness, those 4 seconds. It was so great. We've talked about how the brain works, self-reflection cycles, or the authenticity self-awareness cycle, and our own life stories and leadership traits, as well as leadership of thought. So go ahead and write down anything that you'd like to try to do differently moving forward to raise your self-awareness and lead with authenticity. And I'd also like, if you have a moment, to put it into the chat box or the question box so that we can share these with the rest of the group. You've all been doing so great at helping us and participating and giving us your input. So, Sean, just let me know if you get some comments that come up in the question box.
Definitely. We've got a few here that I'd like to go ahead and share. And one individual here says that in response to this final question here, I don't think I share my own story well enough. So learning how to actually incorporate my life story into the way that I lead authentically is something that she wants to do.
That's excellent. That's so good. You are not your life story, but how you present your life story is really, really key. So yes, that's a good thing to work on.
Another one here, understand more deeply how my neural pathways are set by growing up in a specific culture, really examining how the brain has been wired based on the environment that you grew up in. So lots of research out there to look into that, and I encourage you all to look into that if it's interesting to you. Another one here is identify the strengths and weaknesses of my team, focusing on those and really teasing out the strengths as a way to encourage this maximization of intellectual contribution. I think is a really great one here.
Excellent, excellent. Oh, I hope we're capturing these. We can take these with us for sure.
Take on a more daring role, not always the most comfortable one, forcing yourself, stretching yourself to be exposed to some of that challenge. I think that's a great way to grow and to learn.
Excellent, excellent. Those are wonderful.
This is an interesting one, Sue. This person would like to actually create an anonymous survey that consists of questions on how others view me. Very interesting. Getting feedback in an anonymous format, which could be very effective, honest feedback on how people see you as a leader. And of course, a really good one here, in our diversified world, in our global world, it's important to understand the cultural differences and understand behavioral differences without prejudice. Being able to adopt a certain intercultural lens to view what those norms are without placing a value judgment is super, super important skill. Perspective taking is what I would call it. Using that as a way to lead effectively is certainly a very, very valuable to do, or rather an action to put onto your leadership development plan. That's great. That's great.
That's essential. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So shall we move forward then, Sue?
Yeah, and I have a sort of summary slide that we put together just so that you can kind of get it into our brain. We can get it into our brains, but I've already gone through these about what we have covered today. This doesn't mean we're done. We have a couple more concepts we want to introduce, but these are the ones we've carried through up to this point. And again, start finishing up with the leadership of thought and to think about our thinking. So next we're going to talk for a moment here about self-awareness and authenticity are great, but?
But, yes, I'll pick up here. So self-awareness and authenticity are such an important beginning, but the message we want to send now is that we've got to keep going. Because beyond this, leaders need to get buy-in and engagement from the people that they lead. Doing that in a global environment oftentimes means that you need to adapt the way you communicate and interact and lead in order to bridge those cultural gaps and get that engagement that you need from your organizations. So that takes me to a reminder that the next webinar in our series will be in July, where we will address the next component in the model, which is how to develop and lead with a global mindset. We don't have a specific date just yet, but we will let you know about a month in advance. And the reality is that global leaders face immense pressure to get results across cultures. Just like we said before, leaders need to know how to maximize the thinking and the contributions and the collaboration of a diverse multicultural workforce. But when you think about it, the fact is that there are around 200 countries in the world and even more cultural groups within each of those countries. So I typically like to say that it's really impossible to know everything about so many cultures, but through self-awareness and curiosity, through useful resources like Culture Wizard and the country profiles that we have on over 150 countries, we can develop a more effective approach to those new environments and learn to lead with a global mindset.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I'm going to add one more key concept today, just kind of in summary here, a word about emotional intelligence and self-awareness in global leadership, because there's a really direct link between these two concepts. David Goleman did a lot of research on emotional intelligence and identified a strong link between the greatest global leaders and their emotional intelligence. Maybe this is a new concept for some of us, so let me explain what emotional intelligence is. It's the ability to identify, use, understand, and manage emotions in positive ways in order to communicate effectively, empathize with others, overcome challenges, and diffuse conflicts. When we add the global piece to it, emotional intelligence plus a global and inclusive mindset, it means we have the ability to feel, understand, articulate, manage, and apply the power of emotions to interactions across the lines of differences, across cultures, in other words. And going back to the work on the brain and thinking about our amygdala, sometimes dealing with individuals across differences can trigger that amygdala response. For example, if I'm somebody who's used to having a lot of eye contact and I'm working in a culture where eye contact is considered disrespectful for the leader, I might have a strong emotional reaction, but if I can tap into my emotional intelligence and perhaps go back to those 4 seconds of self-awareness that Peter Bregman introduced us to, perhaps I can manage that and kind of ride that, navigate that, and lead with impact and effectiveness, and also with authenticity. So the direct link between great global leaders and their degree of EQ is success will depend on the ability to read and adapt to those cultural cues. So let me explain really quickly about reading cues and this increasingly complex world that we're working in. If you're only working by yourself, that involves a certain amount of emotional intelligence and leadership adaptability and leading from myself. But when you start to add other people into the mix, then you have to start really reading the cues. And let's say you're working with people who are different ages, different backgrounds, different disciplines. And then you add this element of working virtually. I'm sure many of us are working across geographical distances and time zone differences and so on. Maybe I have my meeting in Singapore and the other folks are in China, or the other folks are in India, or the other folks are in Saudi Arabia. And we have to really be able to read cues even when we can't see people in the room. I don't know if your global team looks like this at the bottom here, but we have very diverse global teams. And each person, as an effective leader, we have to be aware of, first of all, how our followers expect to be led. We need to be aware of how our followers see us. Where do they see us? Are we seeing them in person? Are we only virtual? Do they see us as a peer? Do they see us as a boss? We have to be so clear about who we are, what my role is, so as to present a consistent and clear message around the globe. I also need to be sure that what I'm reading, and that I'm not putting the wrong impression on people. I have to be accurate culturally about how I read others. I also need to be sure that my message that I'm sending is understandable and results in action by my followers. As this picture gets more complex, how am I going to lead with self-awareness and authenticity? Well, we invite you to come to the next webinar, which is on global mindset, in order to really start moving into that direction. But kind of keeping in mind, as we sum up, all of us have this spark of leadership in us. The really big challenge is to really understand ourselves well enough so that we can use our own leadership gifts to serve others, become more effective as global leaders, and to lead by building self-awareness and lead authentically. Back to you, Sean.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for that message. So wonderful to hear that summary. I know we've covered so much in a short amount of time. We wanted to leave you with a few resources to continue learning about this topic, learning about yourself. You'll see here that we've got the life map, the Global Leadership Life Map is coming soon. We're going to be sending a follow-up email that contains both the recording of this webinar and in addition to instructions on where to find the life map. Be on the lookout for that next week. We've also published a white paper on this topic of developing, raising self-awareness, and leading with authenticity. That is available right now on the homepage of Culture Wizard. So log into Culture Wizard. You'll see a banner right there on the homepage for you to download a PDF of this white paper that delves even more deeply into this topic that Sue and I have reviewed today. Of course, you can also download the Culture Wizard mobile app for your Androids and iPhones. And from there, you can access information on over 150 countries, in addition to the Culture Calculator self-assessment, which to me is actually one of the best ways to start raising awareness of your personal cultural values. You can complete the assessment on your phone or you can do it on your computers, but it'll really visually allow you to see where there are gaps between yourself and all of those 150 countries that we have on Culture Wizard. So just a quick note there. I'd like to go ahead and move on to our Q&A segment. We have just reached about 1 hour into our session, so we apologize for those of you who have to go. Of course, the recording will still contain the questions and answers that we go through right now, but for those of you who can stay, why don't you go ahead and type in any questions that you have for Sue and I, and we'll do our best to respond to them. Sue, I actually already have one that I caught from earlier that I'd like to go ahead and ask if you'd like to provide some advice. I think you've got a sense for this given your experience in Japan. But how does teaching others to think on their own feet play out in hierarchical cultures where the leader is expected to give advice and know all the answers? A really, really astute question here.
Oh, that's such a good question, because there is a difference, as I mentioned so many times, that how people expect to be led may differ from country to country. So if we're bringing in a new model, something that's, for example, encouraging people to think on their own feet, and to contribute in that way, and not just be directed towards a solution, it's so important to be transparent about what's going on, and to let people know that this is in order for us to be a more effective global organization. That if I'm giving you all the directions all the time and not allowing you to come up with solutions, it's going to it's not going to be a sustainable future for us. So kind of being transparent with it is important, and maybe even talking about coming from whatever culture you are from and the difference that might be there. Or if you are from the hierarchical culture, say, this is good, and let's respect the hierarchy, and let's find new ways to work within it so that we can inspire people's thinking and their independency of thinking, and inspire that individual that thought process towards a constructive solution. I think if everybody understands we're all working towards solving the same problem, it would work even in a hierarchical country or a culture.
Really good. Really good. There is a thought, actually, not really a question, but it is it kind of begs a question here. At some point during our webinar, someone wrote in that this is starting to sound like be yourself, which is authentic, but then change and adapt to the global environment. I'd like to actually make sure that everyone understands that being authentic is half knowing yourself and what defines your value system, and then the other half of being authentic is actually being aware of the values that drive behaviors in your colleagues around the world, and using that knowledge, using the knowledge of yourself and using the knowledge of the people that you're working with to create an approach that integrates the diversity of styles and ways of thinking to create wealth for your organization, to create wealth for your colleagues, and to make the working environment as productive as possible. We often talk about leveraging cultural diversity as a competitive advantage. How can we actually make the fact that our company is so global work for us and actually create wealth for us? And the idea is that you've got to harness that internal diversity, that diversity of wisdom and perspective and skill. Think about all the different ways of thinking, all the great ideas that could potentially come to bear on a project. How can you align a group of people that are so different but yet have such important things to say along a specific mission? And the idea here is to use this authenticity, not being yourself all the time, but just knowing yourself, being at peace with who you are, and seeing that there is a distance between your style, what you think is appropriate, and what folks around the world may think is appropriate. Kind of reconciling those differences to lead authentically is the message that we've been trying to send. So I hope that kind of clarifies that point. It can be tricky to see the word authentic and to realize that it's more than just being yourself. It's knowing who you are and stretching yourself to see how other people see the world in a very different way.
And I don't know about you, Sean, but I think you and we go to different cultures, we work with people from other cultures, and it is not inauthentic for me to adapt myself and read the cues and adapt to other people's behavior cues wherever I go. That's fully a part of who I am. It is being myself. So being yourself doesn't mean you act the same in every situation. It means you flex. You are kind of at one with the environment. So it is a dilemma, though. I totally agree.
It really is. It really is. To further that point, I often think about the persona that I adopt when I go to Asia, for example. Not all countries are the same, but I go to Hong Kong frequently, and I'm in China frequently. And there is a certain persona that I adopt that I'm very comfortable with. I've practiced it, I've rehearsed it, and I use it to my advantage. And it's a lot of fun because it's an environment in which I get to be a slightly different version of myself. Although I know that at my core, I may act a little bit differently, but I enjoy the task, or rather the opportunity, to turn on that persona in China that allows me to be more effective and to establish relationships in the best way. And of course, everyone knows what it's like to talk to your parents and then to talk to your friends. Not everyone may do this, but I often change the way in my tone of voice when I speak to my parents versus speaking to my friends. So already you can see that we have different ways of approaching people based on who they are and where we are. So it's kind of a bigger stretch, I guess, to look at the global landscape to see how you may be adjusting already to that environment because you know what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, maybe one more?
Yeah, we have time for one more question. Visual cues to people's emotional states are very different from culture to culture. Are there any clues around how we can detect these and any resources that we can leverage to learn about those?
Oh, wow, that is a really good question. And some of it is just, having that experience, really being tuned in and being self-aware. That's like the first step, not assuming that my way and my natural style is what everybody else is going to take on. But of course, there's, there's certainly the tools that we have through the Culture Wizard. Do you want to address that a little bit?
Definitely. The country profiles have a segment called communication, and there's a complete article within that is labeled nonverbal communication. So this pertains to emotional, nonverbal gestures, physical gestures, things that are expressed without words. Of course, it could be tone of voice. That could also be part of it. You could even think about using emoji when you're in a virtual environment, using the little emoticons to express emotion, and even understanding the difference between the emoji that are used in Europe or the U.S. or Asia. They all vary, and there are some clues to learn in those as well. I think you can just look at your iPhone and start to explore those to see how they're different. But generally, the country profiles are a really great resource to learn about those specifics.
Yeah, there are many, many good books on that. Okay, so I think we need to get close to wrapping up here, right?
Yeah, let's go ahead and wrap up, Sue. So I'll just quickly thank everyone for attending today, for paying attention, for writing in your worksheets, and for really being in tune with us for an hour. I know that it's kind of a lot to take in a short amount of time, so we appreciate that. If you have any comments or questions, please go ahead and write me an email, and my email address is right there. And again, we look forward to seeing you in our subsequent sessions in July and also in November. And Sue, thank you for being such a lovely co-host today. It's been a pleasure to facilitate with you.
And for anybody who's still on, remember the journey of discovery isn't necessarily in coming to a new land, but in seeing the one that you're already in with a new set of eyes. Good luck. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.